captivity to freedom, but it's called captivity to purpose, because we're not talking about the sort of purpose, or the sort of freedom, that people often mistake for godly freedom. We're not talking about freedom where you can just do whatever you want. We're talking about freedom to live out our God-given destiny. And we as a church have a God-given destiny. We have a God-given destiny for our generation in this place. But we've got to be free to live out that purpose. And that symbol of a dove coming out of, well, 3 doves, it's like Coronation Street. Coming out of it's Callie, she's very modern. You're showing your age. But it's a picture of the dove coming out. You know, when a bird's in a cage, it's not living out its God-given, created purpose. But when it's out of that cage, it's free. Yes. And God wants us to be free to live out our God-given created purpose. And that's what we're going to carry on talking about. We're going to really hit home that message. The next message series that we're going to start next week is one that I'm really excited about, because it's called In the Image of God. And when we start to live out our lives as people who reflect His image, His true image, not our interpretation of what we think His image is, then we become purposeful people. We become a purposeful church. But we've got to know what He's really like. And so often we have a distorted image of God. And as a result, we have a distorted reflection of God. Because we reflect... I'm going into next week's sermon already. I'm excited about that one. We're excited about this one, so let's come back to this one. Now, yesterday, both Peter touched on it and Bruce preached on it. The story of the prodigal son, it's often called, or the lost son. And they both preached on it. I thought, oh no. But thankfully, they didn't preach it right, so I'm going to do it right. But I looked at it from a different angle. I'm going to look at it from a different angle to how we normally look at this story, because often we concentrate on it being a message for people that were once in the church, have left the church, and can come back home. And that is a good application of this story, don't get me wrong. But I don't believe it's actually the heart of what Jesus was saying. I believe there's actually much more to this story than limiting it to that interpretation, or that application. It is a good application, but to limit it to that does not do justice to this story. This is a very important story that Luke has placed right in the centre of the gospel that he wrote. It's a really essential story. I'm going to look at it again from a different angle to how it's been looked at before. We're going to look at it from a place of finding your purpose. And that might seem strange for those that know this story. We're going to read it. It's 20 verses, but it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Luke 15, 11 to 31. You might want to follow me, or can we have it up on the back? Or not? Doesn't matter if not. It's always good to follow me through, because I do tend to commentate as I'm reading. So it's good to know what bits I've added. It's not like you to forget something, Ray. Luke 15, 11 to 31. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. We often forget the fact that he's got 2 sons. Let's just remember that straight away. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me, remember, as Bruce said yesterday, he said, give me bread. Give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth and lived in wild living. He spent everything. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but nobody gave him anything. He's at a real low at this point. There's nothing worse for a Jewish person, and Jesus was speaking to Jews. There was nothing worse than eating amongst or working with what they considered to be unclean animals. Verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you.'" It's his practiced, rehearsed speech that he was given to his father. "I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick." Notice that the father doesn't answer the son. He doesn't speak to the son to come out with this big speech, rehearsed. It's been rehearsed all the way back on a long journey. "Father, just let me make one of your heights." And the father doesn't answer him. He speaks to his servants. He just thinks what the son said is foolish, so he doesn't even bother to answer it. But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and he is found." So they began to celebrate. I'm excited reading the story, please forgive me. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. Sinners. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving away from you. I've never disobeyed your orders, and you never gave me even a young goat." I'm emphasising this just in case you know. "So I can go and celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours, who has squandered all your property with prostitutes," he doesn't know that, he's just adding that in. "Come, sir, you kill the fatted calf for him." "My son," the father said, probably in that calm voice, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead, and he's alive again.
Praise the Lord.
He was lost, and is found." It's a fantastic story, that. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful story. This story was controversial. This story, to the people that were hearing it, was a real shocker. It's almost as bad as the Good Samaritan story in terms of how much it would have shocked people. There's a lot of things in this story that we take for granted, but especially for the Pharisees and the religious leaders hearing this, but even for the ordinary Jew, would have been shocked by the content of this story. And we can read over that. But what I want to pick out this morning from this story is that both sons, remember there's two sons in this story, both of them were trapped. Both of them. Both of them were in some form of captivity. They both thought that purpose and freedom came in two different ways, but both of them discovered that it just led to slavery. Let's look at that youngest son first. That youngest son thought that freedom was found in using the father's resources to seek his own happiness. He thought that freedom was found in making his own choices, in being independent. Who as a teenager wanted to be independent? You know, I couldn't wait until I was 17 when I could buy my car, when I could learn to drive. For my 17th birthday, I had my first driving lesson because I wanted that independence. And as young people, often we're seeking independence, but it doesn't stop when you're young. We don't like to submit to others' authority when we're old either. It's a lifelong battle with wanting to do our own thing, with wanting to seek purpose through a freedom that is all about us choosing to do what we want to do, but using the Father's privilege in order to do it. He took what was given to him in the Father and used it for his own desires. You know, the youngest son didn't go to the Father and say, Father, you know, I want some independence. Let me just leave the house for a while. I'm going to make it on my own. I'm going to set up a business and make it on my own. He didn't do that. He didn't try and do that. He wanted what was his and the Father to go out and live his own life. If he had have just gone out, if he hadn't have used his father's privileges, he probably wouldn't have got into the same mess. If he'd left the home with just what he had and went out, his wild living would not have lasted long. It's like when young people sometimes run away from home thinking, I want freedom, and then a few hours later, I've got no money, let's go back. That's what it would have been like for the youngest son if he hadn't have taken what belonged to the Father. He wanted all the privileges of what belongs to the Father, but not the responsibility, not the accountability. You know, the story implies that the father would have had to split his property into two and give it to the two sons. And by taking ownership of his share, that youngest son was taking ownership of that share of the property, and by selling it to somebody, he would have had to sell the property, he was bringing shame on the family. Because in Jewish tradition, because the promised land was such an important part of their identity, that if you sold property, it was bringing shame. And yet this younger son sold half the belongings of the father and took it for himself. In doing that, what he was actually saying to the father was this: I'd rather you be dead. I want my inheritance now. I'd sooner that than a relationship with you. That was the attitude of the younger son. In moving away from the country, he was also neglecting his responsibility, because it was a cultural responsibility to look after your parents. And he was neglecting even that. His actions brought great shame. It's because of that privilege that he gets into such a mess. He gets himself, you know, if he hadn't have taken that money, his wild living would have probably lasted a few days, maybe a few weeks. He wouldn't have got himself with the same crowd. He wouldn't have been in with that bad bunch. But it was the father's privilege that enabled him to do that. It was everything that he had in the father that enabled him to go out and live wildly. And all of a sudden, he finds himself in a deep, stinky mess. Feeding pigs. That was the lowest of the low for a Jew. And you know, this sort of attitude of taking what belongs to the Father but not wanting any sort of responsibility or accountability is something we see in the church. I'm going to give a name to it, it's sometimes called liberalism. You know, we want to be able to live our lives however we want, but we want the forgiveness. Yeah. We want the power of the gifts of the Spirit. We want all that belongs to the Father. We want the grace. We want those sort of things, but we want to make our choices. Yeah. We want to live life how we feel we should live it in that moment. And there's a great swathe of liberalism moving into the church, but I don't want to talk about other churches. You know, there are some churches that emphasise that a bit more, and perhaps they shouldn't. But I don't want us to think about other churches. I want us to turn it inwardly on us.
That's right.
I want us to think about how we are. I don't want you just to think about other people in the church either.
That's right.
It's too easy to do that. I want us to think about us. So often, we're guilty of taking what belongs to the Father, but not wanting any sort of responsibility or accountability that goes with that. We've got to be willing to take the responsibility that comes with the privilege. And every single one of us can be guilty of that. Every one of us. You know, and often you can swing from one to the other. I'll come on to what the other is in a second. But we want that sort of life where we don't want to be told what to do. You know, young people don't want to be told not to sleep around with everybody. Want the grace, the freedom. Not any sort of boundaries or restrictions that come with living a life that honours the Father. But what we think is bringing freedom makes us captive. So many times my heart breaks when I see Christians that love God. But when they don't accept any sort of boundaries, direct from God or even accountability one to another, they get themselves trapped in such and such a mess. And I see it time and time again. And I want to be honest, I've been there myself. It may not be in some sort of wild way, but often it can be in the little things. Those little acts of disobedience. I want to serve you, but this gossiping isn't too bad. I want to be able to say what I want to say. They probably deserve it anyway. It's one form of captivity that the younger son finds himself in. But let's just switch our attention to the older son. I've asked Jason to give me a clock at the back because I realise I'm preaching for too long. But I think you've got that on fast forward, Jason. The second son was bound by something else. The second son was bound by a misperception of what being obedient means. The second son was bound by a misperception of who the Father is, and also his own identity. You see, the second son, he didn't seek freedom in the way that the younger son sought freedom. He didn't get trapped by the same things that trapped the younger son, things of the world. But we see at the end of this story that older son is just as trapped as the younger one. Until that end, he seems like the good guy. He seems like the one who's at home working away. We focus on the wild living of the younger one and we forget about the older one. We think that because he's at home, he's safe, he's got everything sorted. But we find out that he's also bound. He's bound by a works mentality. He's bound by legalism. Let's give it a name, legalism. He's bound by a misperception of what it means to be obedient. He's bound by a misperception of what the Father desires from him. When the oldest brother comes back and sees the party that's been thrown for his younger son, he is furious. You know, he complains to the father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. Some translations call it serving, but that root word, it can be slaving or serving, but that root word in the Greek comes from the word that means to be bound like a slave. So whether you say serving or slaving, it's serving from the point of view of being a slave. The older son says this, I've been slaving for you, and I've never disobeyed your orders. See, that younger son, when he was out in the wild, with the pigs, he realised that he'd been a son and wanted to come back just as a slave, just to be with the father. But the older son was living in the father's house, but already had the mentality of a slave. He doesn't think that his father considers him a son. He complains that he's never been to a party with his friends. He's probably never asked for it. He clearly doesn't think that his father is that kind of person. You know, it was cultural that as children were growing up, they were brought up often along with the servants. And the son has got that mentality that he's a slave and not a son. Because he thinks his father is a taskmaster, and because he is a slave, he thinks everybody else should be a slave as well. Because he thinks his father lacks grace, he also lacks grace. He doesn't even refer to his brother as his brother. He calls him your son. Your son. Your son is not my brother. Culturally, he could either have been his brother or his stepbrother. But either way, he was his brother. And he calls him your son. He's living in the house. He's the son of the house, but he's living like a slave. He is captive, and so he tries to keep everybody else captive as well. When Jesus was saying these words, he's probably got the Jewish leaders in mind who were listening to this story. But I believe it's something we see in the church as well. That works mentality. You know, seeing the Father as some sort of taskmaster who we can only appease by being obedient to the rules. They become slaves to the rules. And they try and trap other people with the rules as well. They become fixated on outward signs of obedience, but their hearts are not soft. They often play for positions. A sign of that slavery mentality in the church, that legalism, is when we look at outward things, but we bring worldliness into the church. Worldliness being brought into the church has nothing to do with outward things. It's not to do with how we dress, the style of music or anything like that. Worldliness is when we bring, Galatians 5, when we bring strife, division, jealousy in our hearts. That's when we bring worldliness into the church. And the problem is we can look the part, whatever the part is. We can look the part, but in our hearts we're bringing worldliness into the church. And that's what that son, he wasn't out in the world was in him. He got jealousy. He got bitterness. One son was in the world, the other son had the world in him. But we're all in danger. I don't want you to think about other people in other churches. I don't want you to think about other people in the church. Let's all think about ourselves.
Yes.
Because we can all be trapped in this sort of mentality. And the danger is that we think you've either... What I've done in the past is I've gone from here, from legalism, to more liberal mentality. When I realised the trappings of that, I've moved back here. So more, I've got to praise God, I'm going to do everything to do this, and I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to realise that's a bit of a trap, and it's just now I go back to here. But neither of them, both of them, bring captivity. Both of them are a form of slavery. So what's the road to freedom? Well, when the youngest son humbled himself and headed back to the father, we see how the father sets him free. First of all, he sets him free with 3 different steps, 3 different ways. First of all, he shows him acceptance. Acceptance. It says that the father ran. When the father saw the son, he ran to the son. Now that, for a man of a certain age, now I laugh when I say that because my mother-in-law always says, women of a certain age, and it doesn't matter whether she's talking about being old or young or whatever. So I don't know what a certain age actually is, but it's certain. So when men of a certain age, it was in that culture, it wasn't customary to run. It was undignified to run. He would have had to lift up. He had like this, I won't call it a dress, but a robe. That's a better word for it. A robe. And he would have had to lift that up and run towards the son. He said he hugged him. That sort of embrace, that sort of shows emotion was not culturally normal. But the father wanted to show him acceptance. It was the first step to freedom. When the son realised he was accepted. Secondly, the father then shows him honour. The father puts a robe around the son and puts sandals on his feet. Now, it's probably got very practical purposes, because don't forget, the son would have stunk. He's been with the pigs, he's been out wild living, he probably would have come home stinky, filthy, horrible. There's probably a very practical reason why he did this, but also the fact that Jesus mentions it, that the robe was often a sign of honour. You see that in Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph and the technical dreamcoat. It was a sign of honour to be given a robe. The sandals were a sign of reputation. I know that sounds daft, but actually it's used a number of times in the Bible, and they're actually used in making deals. Sometimes when you made a deal with somebody, you see it in the book of Ruth. You'd actually take off your sandal and swap it as a sign of the deal. So if you're like, Ray, you just take mine and I'll take yours. But it was a sign of reputation. You were staking your reputation on your sandal. And so when the father puts the robe around the son and puts on the sandals, he's given him back the honour and the reputation that he lost in his wild living. Thirdly, the authority. He then puts a ring on his finger and calls him to sit at the father's table at his side. That was a sign where you sat at the meal table, and also the ring is a sign of authority. Kings used to actually often seal things with a specially made ring to stamp their authority. And the passing on of a ring was a sign of authority. And the father is giving authority back to that son. Now with the older son, don't forget, it's the father's words to the older son. My son, he He's shown him acceptance. This is the Father's words to the older son. My son, you were always with me. And everything I have is yours. To the older son, the Father is making the same point. He's saying the same message. You already have my acceptance, my honour and my authority. You just need to start living in it. That should have been the key to life to the older son. The ironic thing about this story is that the youngest son went searching for something he already had. He was after that sort of authority, honour. He was after that. He was after that acceptance amongst his peers. But in searching for it his way, he lost it.
Yeah.
The older son already had it, but because he lived like a slave, he didn't know it. And both of them, as a result, were slaves. You know, the more they searched for it their way, the more they lost it. And the Father had to give it back. The acceptance, the honour, the authority. The Father presented to both of them the same way to freedom. The funny thing about this story, and I believe it's done on purpose, it's a cliffhangers type story. We don't know how it ends. We don't know if the sons ever made it up with each other. We don't know if the younger son went back to his wild living. We don't know if the older son ever started to live in acceptance of the fact that he was a son of the house. We don't know any of these things. And I believe it's left there on purpose, because it's a choice that every one of us has to make.
Yes.
Are we going to be people that live as slaves? Or are we going to accept the acceptance, the honour and reputation and the authority that comes from seeking the Father? From seeking that time with the Father, that time with the Father. It comes from finding the Father's will. I want to encourage you not to get yourself trapped by a mindset that to please God we must be doing this, this, this and this, and I can't be doing this and that and the other. Or the opposite side of that is well, I need to be free to make my own choices and God's grace covers everything. Both of those are traps. Freedom to live out of purpose comes from when we just passionately seek time with the Father.
Amen.
And when we start to realise who we are,
Yes.
we don't need to seek it from anywhere else.
That's right.
And we can start to live with that acceptance. We can put our shoulders back, knowing we have the honour and reputation. And we can live with that sort of authority that enables us to bring His kingdom into our communities. I believe that many of us, and even as a church, we can so often be trapped in either of those. In this form of liberalism or this form of legalism. And God doesn't want any ism. He wants a relationship.
Amen.
He wants a relationship with all of us. You know? I want to pray. I just want to pray for, first of all, I've managed to do it. Oh no, that's reset aside too. Oh well, it was a good effort. Can we stand, please? I want us to pray for us as a church.